Greetings, everyone. Welcome to part one of our three-part webinar series, Finding the Power in Numbers. My name is Bernard Hernandez, and I am Chief Information Officer with DM&A. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We know your time is valuable, so thank you so much. Just a few logistics before we begin. During the webinar, the phones will be on mute, and you will be in listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, please type it in using the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. You can type a question anytime during the webinar, and we will answer as many as we can. Those that we don't get to, we will reply via email after the webinar. Just a little bit about our presenters today. From Portland, Maine, we have Mary Keysor. Mary is a success coach with DM&A. Previously, she was the food service director at Maine Medical Center. Mary has won the prestigious Silver Plate Award and is past president of HFM, which is the Legacy Association of AHF. Mary is also a very talented artist. From Buffalo, New York, we have Mr. Bill Klein. Bill is the Chief Executive Officer of DM&A. Under Bill's tremendous leadership, we have become one of the largest healthcare consulting firms in America, and now doing great work in Australia and the Middle East. Bill also serves on the Industry Advisory Board of AHF. So without further ado, please welcome Mary and Bill.
Great, thank you, Bernard. Welcome, everybody. As you know, this is part one of a three-part series. We're going to methodically take you through data and numbers, certainly starting with the all-important exploration of fear and gaining comfort from numbers and the value in taking that quantum leap. Part two, which will be in October, we will provide you 5 tools that you need to have to properly track data, and that's going to be very important, and it's participated by Dave Reeve, who is from the Elmhurst Memorial Hospital in Elmhurst, Illinois. He's also the AHF Treasurer-elect, and he'll share some of the tools that he's using and associates with Mary that's going to help you organize and make sense of the numbers you have, and we'll discuss why that's important today. In part 3, in November, they will be joined by Felicia Smith. She's the manager of the Critical Access Hospital in Converse County, of Douglas, Wyoming, and they will then share their experiences and what the utilization of numbers and how the stories they tell have helped them become very highly effective directors in their organizations. So with that said, we're going to start off today's session.
Okay. This is a subject that Bill and I feel pretty compelled to talk about, but there's some realities here, so let's do a reality check first. The first one, it takes time, and clearly the most frequent comment I hear when talking to people starting on this numbers process, and it is a process, is that it takes time. But Dave Reeves and Felicia Smith in part 3, I think, are going to totally convince you that any time invested in numbers and learning what those numbers mean to get your department to where you want it to be is well worth it. And let's not forget that increasing your knowledge as a professional, your knowledge of finance, can only add to your career growth and even future job opportunities. Reality check. It can be boring, and I always have a little trouble with this one. So, Bill, help me if you want. I think I hear that collecting data can be boring, and you know what? I think it's boring too. I have some analytical skills, but like Bernard said, I'm an artist, so I'm looking for creativity and what I can do with that. But I got to tell you that the way I got through that is I delegated the part of process collecting to a couple of people who liked doing that and who were much better than me. They collected the data. I held them accountable, so they had to get it to me by a certain date. And then my job was to determine the results of the data and use those data in a creative way. And, you know, I guess I thought collecting data might be boring, but using it in the right way, the creative way, can not only be effective, but very exciting.
That's true, Mary. In collecting that data and eventually making it tell a story, which hopefully can get administration behind a project that you are excited about, it's a stepping stone toward gaining the support that you need to continue to find the growth of your department that you're looking for. So you look at it as a stepping stone to getting to what you ultimately want, and I think that measure of being boring can certainly be eroded away.
I agree. And, you know, I guess when we do reality checks, we need to talk about the fact that it's confusing too. Do you want to comment on that, Bill?
Well, you know, there are so many reasons why, which we're going to cover today. A large part of that, the reasons why numbers and calculations can be confusing, and we want to help dispel some of that today. So when we finish today's presentation in the building block of part 1 of 3, we hope that people will say and take a clean or fresh look at the importance of data collection, the right data collection, and the use of those numbers.
Yeah, and I think everybody, I mean, we all want a target, and a lot of people will say, well, what's the national target for, and ask about a certain productivity measurement. But I think we can get some national targets from sources such as Press Ganey, but it's a little harder getting factual industry targets for financials. And the reality is that data for a 200-bed facility in Iowa might be very different from a 200-bed facility in New York. Your numbers are unique to your facility. That's
true. And of course, as we were alluding to beginning today, as we'll continue on, the benefits, besides gaining support from administration, which ultimately is the goal that I think most people would go after, there's a significant number of benefits in mastering the numbers. First off, it's getting administration trained in our world. In 15 years of consulting, I've only come across 3 administrators who used to be a food service director. Most really don't understand our work. They're not students of the food nutrition services industry. And the complexity and the many ways our numbers via the many processes that we have in our operation between patient meals, catering, vending, Starbucks, floor stock, all the things that we do, all those numbers via those processes and how they're generated, it really is confusing to administration. When administration, when their knowledge of our process diversity grows, that works to enhance the image of the department as a complex and integrated contributor throughout the hospital. And I think we have seen a major resurgence in the affinity towards food services by administration over the last 5 or so years. A fortunate outcome or benefit from Obamacare because of the need for satisfaction outcomes from the whole organization and what food service can do for it. As Mary mentioned before, with administration respecting and growing respect for food service leadership can be enhanced by having a thorough and a deep knowledge and a command of their numbers. Food service leadership can provide meaning that is essential to growing respect and obtaining the financial support that we need from administration to do what we need to do to contribute to the hospital's mission statement. The last one, which is near and dear to everybody on this call, and it should be, and if it's not, it's going to be, when we don't know when a contractor is knocking on the door of administration, usually our department's in the basement, administration's on the first floor. This is a big and vital outcome when we have mastered our numbers. Many administrative folks are really enamored And as I say, numbers confused, bamboozled by slick salespeople from the contractor world. If we can get administration trained on a very frequent basis, usually during your monthly meeting, and educated on what good and reasonable numbers look like, they can be in a position when the contract comes knocking on the door and they are throwing numbers at the administrator having then been prepared, educated, and armed for the knock on the door, they can politely say, no, thank you. Our numbers are unbeatable. So, there you go, very good. So, why do we avoid the numbers? This is what we see as we work with our clients. There are so many different numbers and calculations that we're told by food service directors. This has developed, Mary, over time for many reasons. We hear frequently, I was never taught the formulas. Well, there are formulas aplenty, but the right formulas and the nationally accepted formulas are what we are going to share with the audience over the next 3 sessions. Other one is my hospital calculates things their own way. Well, that's not uncommon. You have 6,000 hospitals, you perhaps have 6,000 approaches because you've got 6,000 CFOs and administrators. And administrators change their roles and sometimes their locations every 3 to 5 years. So you're going to deal with a CFO or an administrator coming in wanting to put their personal mark on the organization after you've already got your prior boss trained in how things are. That's another reason why we avoid the numbers, because it becomes very confusing. And of course, my hospital uses a company to measure productivity. We have run into organizations like Solutions. Many hospitals, most hospitals belong to a GPO, and they might have a program that the organization has opted to use. A lot of food distributors have programs that are available and hospitals do use. And of course, going back to the prior comment, administrators who have changed facilities may bring in their experience with a contractor and how that contractor calculated and reported the numbers to the administrators. So, it's no surprise that the fear of numbers that food service directors have take on any of these elements, and by no means is this the end of all answers as to why people avoid them.
Oh, true. And, we talk about how do you gain comfort in numbers and what to do and what not to do. But as a manager, I always thought that figuring out what to do and what not to do was part of my job, especially when it came to numbers. And the process can be confusing, I agree, unless it's systematized or somehow organized within the department. I've seen managers, I've worked with managers who started the process and said, I don't have the right tools, I don't know what to do, it's too time consuming. And I've seen them use one of the tools we're going to talk about next week, which tracks just internal data and the tool is called KNDS. They'll use that and organize, consolidate their internal data, feel good about that, feel comfortable with that. And then they might choose to join AHF and enter the Express program for a more global look. So it's, like I said in the beginning, this whole numbers thing is a process, and gaining comfort will come with that. Another, you want to talk, Bill? Want to say something?
Well, on that note, Mary, it's important, as in any building of any house, you can't put the roof on before you have a foundation built. And having a tool or the right tools to collect the numbers and understand which ones are important and which ones are not is the key. And that's where a lot of frustration comes from, is people gather numbers, don't know what they're gathering, and they're gathering in many cases the wrong numbers, and then they get further frustrated and they throw their hands up and they give up.
Oh, absolutely, and we're addressing that in the second part of this series, when we look at the five industry tools that are available, there's others, but we're looking at 5, and we want people to know a little bit about those tools so they can make the decision of picking the best tool for their department. So the whole series, I think, is going to look at making people comfortable with this. When I talk to folks, I see some common mistakes. And one of the mistakes I see is that, and I'll say, I haven't found anybody who doesn't collect data in the Food and Nutrition Services Department. In fact, I think it's safe to say that most collect too much and never use it. But when you're collecting data, because you'll have it in your department, I think if you, for instance, spend time collecting data in the call centers, just an example, or the diet office to understand the diet breakdown, and that data might be very relevant to your operation. That's fine. It won't be relevant to the finance department or administration. They're interested in cost and cost containment and satisfaction. So I guess understanding the numbers and making sure that you're focusing your time on the numbers that will bring you the best success for your department is what you want to do. If you have data, but because of time constraints, and I'm guilty here for sure, I had the data, but I was so busy and I didn't analyze it, then, then I think leadership, me, needed to reevaluate how time was going to be used. And after just a couple of contract, maybe scares, I decided that I would prioritize time for collecting data. There are obstacles in this process, and we're not going to say that this is just a slam dunk, but it's nothing. They're nothing that can't be overcome. As a manager of the department, we are really, in effect, managing someone else's money. And as leaders, it is our responsibility to integrate financials into the department functions. It has to become part of the fabric of the department. By getting staff involved, whether with collecting or with whatever process in this, and sharing financials with staff makes them feel informed and important and gives them a feeling of ownership. Having the right tools to collect the data makes it easier. And again, Dave's going to be reviewing some of the industry tools so you can see what might work for you. Bill, did you have a comment on partnership with finance? You want to say something about that?
Well, yeah, Mary. We have found in a lot of locations that in the absence of food service taking the lead and waiting to be told, finance, and we may mean finance, it could be the administrator of record, but also finance has a habit of assigning arbitrary targets for what results the department needs to obtain and achieve. We may be hitting them, but unable to prove them and validate them because we don't have and are not tracking and reporting the correct numbers. But also, yeah, Mary, I'm reminded about a story you told me about your experience when you first started as food service director at Maine Medical Center, and you had to create partnerships. Why don't you share with us, how you how to go through that process, some of the minefields?
I started without a lot of knowledge about numbers and learned from finance quickly that if I didn't work with them on numbers or know my numbers, they would make sure they would take the opportunity to present me with productivity targets that I felt were not right. So I spent a lot of time with finance. I actually was part of changing the finance philosophy that each department had, would have, in fact, a finance person to work with, and that person just taught me so much. So my experience was that the more I used my numbers, the more I could speak to finance in their terms, and more credibility I learned. And one thing I'd like to just share with the group, everybody on this call has experienced having their hospital bring in a productivity firm to evaluate things, and we did too. And I got to say, it was system-wide. It was a very complex process for them, and actually I thought they made some really good recommendations, but not for food service. Their final report said that food service cost was way over the top, and they recommended outsourcing. But I had by that time known to learn my numbers, and I had a good relationship with finance. And so I said to finance, I want to see what their number was. They're saying our cost per patient day is excessive, and I'm saying it's not. And had I not had that connection with finance, I don't think I would have gotten that report. But what I learned was that the firm took the expense for the entire system for food service, but only recognized patient days in one facility. So of course their number looked high. My number was right, and the talk of outsourcing ended. And I'm telling you, that would not have happened had I didn't know that my number of cost per patient day was right. So finance...
Mary, that also goes part and parcel with having that relationship with finance. As much as we tend to fear numbers, we may also fear trying to create a relationship with if we're assigned a financial person from the Office of Finance, and creating that relationship with someone with numbers. If you're fearful of numbers, you may also be apprehensive about a relationship with somebody who lives numbers every day, because it could be, not threatening, but intimidating at least. So by breaking out of your fear of numbers and creating a relationship with finance, you were able to get access, open access to the proposal that was put forth, and be able to punch holes in it.
And the other thing is they don't know our business. They were interested in learning about how we do count meals and what is going on in our business. They're just used to seeing the numbers. So it was a very valuable, that department just became a very, very valuable department for food nutrition services.
Probably also helps to bring down a plate of cookies from time to time, doesn't it?
Let me just say that I'm not above bringing something very nice to the budget committee. Finance once said, "Are you bribing us?" And I said, "I'm not above bribing." So sure, it doesn't hurt. This next slide, numbers to make your case. I just believe so strongly in using a number to make your case, and I'll give you an example later, but for right now, let's just look at these numbers, and so we can get the gist of this. 120.
Mary, I think we all know what the 120 over 80 is. I would imagine if we ask the audience right now, to anybody to send us a note, does anybody not know what that is? I think we would get, zero responses. I think everybody understands what that is, and that's part of our message here. So go ahead.
So, excuse me. So 120 over 80 is the normal blood pressure, give or take some. And I have to tell you a personal story. A couple of years ago, I wasn't feeling so good, and I was sent to the ER. Now, everyone here knows what an ER can be. I walked in, and it was packed. Wasn't a seat available, and I thought, oh boy, I'm going to be here a long time. And I checked in, and ER does have a very good triage system. So I checked in, and they put me in a triage room, and my blood pressure was the first thing they took, and it was 205/100. Now, I mean, that is like off the chart. So the nurse looked at that, and she obviously was a little nervous, and she said, "Are you dizzy?" And I said, "Yes." And that number, that 205/100, took me from the bottom of the list in terms of getting care and put me at the top. She thought I was having a stroke. By that time, so did I. And I was in a room with a team of doctors within minutes. And they were sure I was having a stroke. So they did what they were doing, and they did their diagnostics, and 4 hours later, I walked out of there with normal blood pressure and a diagnosis of vertigo. So, you know, I was fortunate, very lucky that day, but it just points out that a number can communicate so much more than if I had gone in and given 10 different symptoms. I probably wouldn't have had the same result as her taking my blood pressure right away. And if you go down to the bottom and look at the 25 body mass index, it's credit to our nutrition staff that dietitians and nutritionists have been talking about body mass index as being part of the whole care evaluation forever. I mean, forever. And yet, recently, last few years, body mass index, BMI, is now part of a normal office visit with a physician. Everybody's calculating BMI because that number will tell. 25 says one thing, and a BMI of 37 says something much different. So I guess we're really excited about the way numbers can make the case for what we want to do.
Mary?
Yeah?
That's all very true, but keep in mind, and this is for the audience as well, is that that 120/80 number or any other numbers that are we're all very comfortable with, and we all understand what those numbers mean, what they tell us. It has taken time for people, whether we're talking about BMI or 25% off or anything else, it has taken time for people to become comfortable with a number, which goes part and parcel to a educational process to get the number established out there as a matter of a national accepted baseline, and then people then talk to that number and that level, that range over and over again becomes very, very accepted and comfortable. So that is where we're talking about getting the numbers understood and then educating our administrator on that and making sure, whether they want it or not, to compel them to listen and get educated on this, because eventually the need for comfort in the numbers at their level will translate into a positive for the department that otherwise wouldn't be there.
Oh, no, yeah, no question. And that is such a good comment, because the BMI, for example, dietitians used that. They used their knowledge of those numbers to educate the physicians. And they worked hard at educating the physicians. So we need to do that with all the numbers.
That's right. The dietitians, the doctors, food service directors to their administrators, and of course the finance. But you know, the buck stops with the administrator. So as this being the starting point for part 1, 2, and 3, having that confidence, what do you do with it? Well, as Mary shared, she was able to challenge not a contractor per se, but a auditing company who was recommending a contractor. She was able to punch holes in that and challenge their proposal, and she ended up making the correct case. We used data to validate the need for change. Recall that Mary had made a case for money to make a change in her operation. and the numbers were proven out over time that she had asked for to make the change in the operation. As I said a minute ago, sorry, Mary?
Yeah, I was just going to say a little bit about that story, but
yes, please.
You know, using numbers, I always use numbers for the budget committee, but not to the point where I should have been using. But there came a time when I wanted to improve my department operations, and I needed capital funding. Now, everybody knows that in a tight market, getting capital means you're competing with radiology and cardiology and lab and all the departments that bring in a lot of money. So I went to the budget proposal, or budget committee, and I had a really in-depth, valid, I thought valid, report. It was a long report, but it was a justification, and I was denied. So the next year, I went back and I used a different tactic. I had been looking at numbers for a couple of years, and I used numbers to negotiate with the budget committee. So I said, okay, if you guys give food service $200,000, we're going to guarantee a 20% increase in satisfaction and a 15% decrease in operating expense, and we'll do that within 2 years. So maybe they were just tired of listening to me, but the justification I submitted wasn't a long 10-page thing. It was short, but it was full of numbers, and food service got the funding, and 18 months later we submitted our project to the facility. The facility was having a PI contest facility-wide, and we proved that we met all of our indicators. We met our ROI. I gave back $200,000, didn't need it, and it won the first place award in this facility-wide contest. And I got to tell you, being known in a system-wide, being known that you understand your numbers is sure doesn't hurt when you go into the next budget cycle.
That's true. So we also use data to respond to economic changes. We all have been exposed to the various conflicts and wars throughout the world, which invariably affect oil and energy, weather-related issues like hurricanes, tornadoes, crop failures, all these things. We need to be able to have control of our numbers and a deep understanding of them so we can respond accordingly, because the administration is going to come asking us. We have better preempt that, and we can't really do that effectively as you did at Maine Medical without having that deep knowledge of the numbers. So one of the terms that Mary used earlier, which I use frequently, is managers in food services. We are stewards of the department. We don't own food services. We are there as a steward of the hospital's money, and we're entrusted with making good decisions. So we need to find all the revenue streams that the department has or can have and be created, some of which can look like a charge out, like an interdepartmental charge. We need to understand the difference between real income, real dollars, real cash, and transfers and credits, and educate administration on the importance and application of these activities. Many administrators don't really understand what the transfers and credits mean in our calculations, because what they call that, the industry term we'll all agree to, is funny money. And they don't realize and don't really want to allow us to take credit for those things, yet they do have a direct impact on our budgeting. Showing the cost of free services is vital. We teach administration so they know where cuts and or adjustments can be made, which happens in our industry all the time, and the impact of what each adjustment that could be made and what it would mean to the political ramifications within the organization. As a steward of the department, just shifting costs over to another department is not helping your boss to be well informed. educating the boss on exact current expenditures by other departments using the food and nutrition services, supplies, and services, highlighting unusual, extreme, or questionable levels is our responsibility.
This is an example of a hospital that had gone through a lot of budget cuts, and things were getting very tight. Labor had been decreased, all of the things that everybody's going through today. And yet finance doesn't understand the cost of all these things, and finance came back and said, we need everybody to cut X% again. It was to the point where there really wasn't any way to cut labor. And even anybody who wanted to help in any way, it had been cut too much, and any more cuts wasn't going to be a good thing. So instead of arguing with that, the food service director put together, and it took a long time, by the way, to cost out all of these services, but put together a list for her boss and said, okay, you want to give free coffee to staff, I get it, that makes everybody happy, that's nice, but it's $20,000. And then you can just see the rest of the expenses. Okay, you want to have a cafe open all night long, this is what it costs in labor and food. If you want to close it, we can talk about cutting that. So we went through all that, and the floor stock was the program picked first because after seeing the expenses and how it had increased over the past 5 years, administration finally said, we need a new corporate philosophy on floor stock. And again, the food service department, like Bill said, we're there to provide a service. It's not our decision to stop free coffee for staff. I loved giving free coffee for my staff. But if you want to cut food services, maybe it's time to look at cutting some of these expenses. And step one in doing that is costing it out and knowing what those numbers are. So that's, everybody is struggling at this time with all the free services that we're giving and all of the problems that really are culture problems that we can't do alone. We need to provide that information to administration and let them make the decision.
And it's important, Mary, in the age of Obamacare, the ACA, that we're all dealing with, and it's only going to get tougher because reimbursement is dropping. We should anticipate administration asking our department or the somewhat frequent Friday email from the CFO, everybody needs to cut, 15% from their budget in the next 30 days. Those come out. I've dealt with them when I was a director, and I had a plan, much as we're looking at right now, and I said, no problem. If you want these things, I can do these things. But, here's what's going to happen if we do these things. It's your choice because it's your hospital. But at the end of the day, anything that my administrative leadership chose to exploit, whether it was close the cafeteria at night and the weekend or whatever it might be, it was my requirement and my deal with them, and I encourage everybody on the call today to remember, is that they need to put out the notification to the organization that it was their choice, and they instructed Mary Keysor to make this change. It wasn't on Mary's unilateral decision. Having said that, if we don't do that, then there's a significant political fallout that the food service department and the food service leader will take unnecessarily. A small point to make, but it has a very deep ripples if we don't take advantage of that information.
Boy, that sure is true. We talked about tracking data that administration is interested in. And I'm just going to put these two formulas up just to kind of reinforce something Bill talked about when he talked about funny money. I had a great boss. Actually, I've been very fortunate with all my bosses, but the second formula is the only one he wanted. He wanted net of cash per patient day. He wanted to know the cost the hospital had to pay to have an operational food nutrition services department and the actual cash received. He wanted to know what the net of that was. In his mind, it wasn't about transfers and credits because that's funny money. It was, what does it cost and what are you bringing in and what's it going to cost me for patient days? So, I mean, I get that, but I said to him, but I don't want to just talk about what you want. I want you to know what I know because I'm going to need your support on this. So net cost per patient day is something I learned from AHF, and it's all costs minus the sum of all the revenue plus the transfers and credits plus foregone revenue, because that's lost revenue, minus patient days. And what
Mary?
that, yes?
For a moment, for those in the audience, those who may not understand the terminology, give us a quick explanation of foregone revenue. What is that exactly?
Okay, that an example of that might be the cafe that gives guests and visitors discounted meals, or the cafe that gives everybody free coffee. So if everyone gets free coffee, guests, visitors, everybody, that's a really neat thing to do. But if you didn't get free coffee, the cafe would get payment or revenue from coffee. So it's a way of looking at something like staff cafeteria subsidy and making a note of what does that mean in terms of money. That plus the transfers and credits. Bill talked about that. So many people say to me, I don't have to worry about it because I charge it out. But to Bill's point and to my boss's point, that's funny money. And I wanted to know what it was because I live in Maine. We had a very aggressive internal catering program. I'm not, if my docs wanted lobster rolls, I'm not going to say, oh no, that's too expensive. I wanted him to know. And by showing him and educating him, showing him what the transfers and credits were, what the foregone revenue was, over a period of time, a couple of years at least, we made some tremendous changes in not only CAF sales and revenue checks, but in the transfers of the whole internal catering program. So, you know, there are certainly more key performance factors, and we're going to talk about that actually in the second, in the next program. So, but these are very important, and these are the ones, as I said before, administrator might not be interested in something that happens within the department, but they're interested in this.
Mary, are these nationally accepted formulas?
Yes, they are. AHF will, they have a benchmarking program called Benchmarking Express, and they really set the standard for some of these, and this is what they have said. Net of cash per patient day, that's very standard. You can go anywhere on the internet and find how you calculate that. It's what does it cost and what do you get? Just like at home. What do you make and what do you spend? What's the difference? So yes, I'm comfortable in saying that those are acceptable nationally.
Great.
And 5 steps. Well, you know, Bill is sort of brings us to the end, but I think we've covered the steps. Let me review quickly. We talked about tracking only data that is interested to the administration and the department. And I said in the second session, we're going to clearly look at some of the key metrics that the tools will give you. So that is a big step in tracking data, knowing what the tools, what the key metrics are. We talked about reaching financial goals and certainly including staff in the process. They like to be included. And maybe there's some financials we can't share with them, but it's okay to share those finances. We talked about using the right tool, getting what is best for the department. And again, the next session is going to help that as Dave Reeves explains some of that. We've talked about setting up department tracking systems, and Bill, you said something interesting the other day, and that was that you can get a system that was set up at one time, but no longer.
Well, yes. Many food service directors have changed jobs, and they go into a facility behind somebody else who has been there for a while. Knowing what they know today and what they'll gain over the next 2 sessions, it's important that they examine the current system, whatever's in place, however robust it may be, and be prepared to literally throw it out and start fresh and not try to weld any new knowledge onto a broken system. If that system does not serve you, then you need to be prepared to make a radical change and start fresh, because we always have to consider who's knocking on the door and who's coming in behind us, i.e. a contractor. We've got to be in control of our numbers, and if you don't have a smooth, well-efficient, well-oiled program and you're trying to work with what you got and then try and band-aid it, you're only going to be your own worst enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sometimes hard to get out of that, and you need administration support for that, but you just got to do it.
Well, we're going to give them the tools to do so at the conclusion of the 3rd session. They will be well prepared to make a concerted effort and an examination of their organization and say, what do I have working? If it works, if it doesn't, I now have a way and a baseline from which to rebuild a functional reporting system.
Yeah, and you know, I think the 5th bullet here, it's so important to tie some of this responsibility to the manager in the department and the staff. We're all in this together, and giving them some of the information is the right thing to do. I spent some time talking to folks about what information do you share and what don't you share. And, you know, if you see that the floor stock cost is going up and up and up and it's getting out of control, obviously you want to share that with administration, because that's an organizational culture thing. You're going to need help with that. If you see that your labor costs are going up and up and up, I don't think you want to take that to your administrator. I think you want to say to your managers, how come? So, you know, I think the department head ends up using all of the data that they're getting from these tools in a way that helps them communicate to administration what they want communicated. And so they have the control for that. So clearly, tying all of this into everybody's performance, in my opinion, is the right way to go.
Righto. So as we tie up, today we discussed, you know, apprehension of numbers. Hopefully we've been able to speak to many reasons for fear of data and numbers. We talked about the reasons we avoid them. This drill down hopefully touches on many of your concerns so you can move beyond them. How to gain confidence with diverse data. The right tools will help with that, and assembling the right numbers is key. The how and the why numbers can make your case. Mary has shared a number of stories, as well our panelists will in part 2 and part 3. Our responsibilities as stewards. Look at yourself as a steward. We all take pride in our departments. We don't own it, so there's that little barrier we got to remind ourselves about. And as stewards, we are commissioned to provide a service, and in that service, a factual information base to the organization. We need to report to them what's going on Don't assume they know that nursing floor 5 is eating, $20,000 a month in food. We need to be responsible to share that with them. What administrators want? They want the bottom line, net costs, and we showed you what those formulas are. The mistakes to avoid, Mary just talked about those. Having those shared by Mary today, as well as our panelists, will refresh you again on parts 2 and 3. And of course, the 5 steps to success: establishing key metrics, having the financial goals, creating the strategies to reach those goals legitimately, setting up the department tracking system, and tying that all into manager and staff performance. Do not let the numbers live in one person's computer. Get them out there and let people understand where they are and how they can contribute to numbers that we want to grow, i.e. retail growth, and of course cost controls as well. Our staff are making it happen every day. We need to make sure they're part of that information and knowledge sharing.
Excellent job, Mary and Bill. At this time, we will do a Q&A session for a few minutes until the top of the hour. If you have any questions for Mary and Bill, please type it in the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel at this time.
Bernard, I have a question from Janelle Welch. She asked the question, will we have copies of the presentation slides? Yes, they will be sent out to everybody who signed up for the presentation. Patricia, I think that answers your question. Rick Towninger, why don't you contact me separately about the catering and transfers, markup, and credit question you have. That will be probably something better served for a private conversation. I don't have any other questions coming through.
Okay. All right, no problem. If you think of any questions after the webinar, please feel free to email us at info@destination10.com, and we can answer them offline and share with the group if necessary. All right, folks. By tomorrow, you will receive an email from me, which will include the handout, the CEU certificate, a link to this webinar recording if you want to share it or if you want to review some of the material, as well as registration links for parts 2 and 3 coming up on October 13th and also on November 4th. Mary, can you please advance to the next slide? Folks, if you have any immediate needs, require any support or intervention, please don't hesitate to call us for a free consultation. Mary or one of our excellent success coaches will be happy to talk with you. We are here to help you guys. Also, if you reference this webinar using code KNDS10, you will receive 10% off this DM&A service. Thank you, Mary and Bill, for this invaluable education on knowing our numbers, which is so important in our jobs and for satisfying administration. On behalf of Mary, Bill, and myself, thanks for attending our webinar. Have an amazing rest of the day. Goodbye, everyone.